Okay, so welcome everyone to another seminar of the Holocaust Studies Program of Western Galilee College. We have inside this seminar program, we have this series of speaking with Holocaust researchers about their experiences, the way they went into what they are doing today, why do we do what we do, etc. So it was really important for me to have Natalia here, and who is a long time friend and an inspiration too. And we thought, who will be the right person to interview or to speak with Natalia? And we took another very good friend and a dedicated researcher who is Avinoam Patt. He is the Maurice Greenberg Professor of Holocaust Studies at New York University, where he also serves as director of the Center for the Study of Antisemitism. He is the author of multiple books on Jewish responses to the Holocaust, including Finding Home and Homeland on Jewish Youth and Zionism in the Aftermath of the Holocaust, and a lot of other volumes. I will also mention his, I will not talk about edited volumes, but his book on the Warsaw Ghetto, the afterlife of the Warsaw Ghetto, and books coming up on Israel and the Holocaust. So you can find on the net, he wrote a lot more than that. Anyway, he's also a very good friend, and we were blessed to do several projects together, and I think he's just the right person to speak with Natalia. So Avinoam, the floor is yours, and the format will be they will discuss whatever they will discuss. After that, we'll have a Q&A, also run by Professor Avinoam Patt. So put your questions in the chat, and we'll see what we can bring into the discussion.
And then we'll have a l'chaim.
Yeah, I didn't get ready for that. Okay.
Okay.
The floor is yours.
Boaz. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to have the opportunity to have this conversation with such a wonderful colleague as Natalia. And when I saw the email and said, "Would you want to have a conversation with Natalia to do an interview on her academic career?" I said, "Of course." It's always an honor and an opportunity for us to have some time to chat. So, as Boaz said, exactly, I'll take the next 45 minutes or so to chat about Natalia's career and her academic trajectory. But as you have questions, feel free to use the chat function, and we will then turn it into a conversation with the audience as well. So just by way of introduction, I'll just say that Natalia is now the Harry Rich Professor of Holocaust Studies at the University of Florida, Gainesville. And of course, she has held numerous other positions, including previously at Touro College in the Graduate School of Jewish Studies, and as a guest professor at the Polish Academy of Sciences and at the University of Wrocław, and in many, many other places. But Natalia and I, we've known each other for a long time. And so I want to start there at the sort of beginning of your academic career, because Natalia, you're one of the few people that I know that actually has 2 PhDs. It was not enough to have 1 PhD, you have 2 PhDs. And so I'm wondering if you could start by telling us a little bit about, so we first met in the PhD program in Hebrew and Judaic Studies at New York University, where you completed your PhD in 2010, but you came to NYU from the University of Warsaw, where you had written your dissertation on the Zionist movement in Poland. So tell us a little bit about sort of your academic career, where you started, what began your interest in the field of Polish Jewish history, but also Holocaust studies and the aftermath of the Holocaust, and what are the through lines that you see in terms of the questions that you've been asking in your work, going from the aftermath of the Holocaust to then writing about Polish Jewish historians in the period before the war, and and then we'll get to the work that you're doing right now. But just tell us a little bit about sort of your own trajectory.
Thank you, Avi. Thank you, Boaz, for the invitation, and thank you, wonderful friends that I would love to actually sit around the table with, and people I don't know yet in person. So I must say that when Boaz invited me, it's like you don't say no to Boaz, but there is a degree to self-indulgence in talking about, the historian and her life and career that seems to me a little bit comical, especially as a follow-up to a conversation with Gadol Hador with Dan Michman. So I decided that I will not say no to Boaz, really as an opportunity to discuss the field, to discuss the kinds of things that are happening in and around Holocaust studies. And to do it with Avi is like an extra pleasure. We share a doctoral father, so we are academic family. Now, I think that in some ways my trajectory is somewhat typical for my generation, but also maybe of interest for other generations. That is that I came to history in 1990, right after the first free elections in Poland, and into the Department of History at the University of Warsaw, when we all had a feeling, now this is pre-Bologna system, so you did the old good German 5 years of MA, no BA, just sort of what is in American system really considered already graduate school. But we all shared a sense of everything opening up. The archives were opening up. It was hectic, but you could go and read the documents of the Central Committee of the Communist Party in Poland that were still not in the archives, but in the ministerial offices. And not just the documents were becoming available, but also questions and histories were becoming available. And I was not yet entirely sure or aware fully of the degree of blank spots in what I thought of as Polish historiography and Polish historiography addressing Jewish history as part of it. And I came to study history interested already in a history of Polish Jews, but really coming out of years when there were individual articles published in underground leaflets and books by Krystyna Kersten, for example, who was one of the first people to write about Kielce pogrom. But the field was very much in a state of becoming something. And so I look back on this as a moment that probably will never happen again in that way, of a generation coming to university with a sense of no censorship, at least not a formal political censorship, very supportive professors who themselves didn't really exactly have the training, say, in Jewish history. I studied with Jerzy Tomaszewski and Marcin Kula, who were both fantastic historians, but they were not reading Jewish languages. And that work that was being done in the 90s, in the early 90s, was a lot more of what did various kinds of Poles, non-Jewish Poles, think about Jews than a Jewish history. Now, I started the university also working at the archives of the Jewish Historical Institute, which was a remarkable place for the same reason, a kind of a generational and political moment when people I was just sitting there paginating documents like a good first-year student who was given a job that didn't require much experience of knowledge or knowledge. But at the next desk was Małgorzata Bonikowska, who was arranging reparations for Polish Jews for the first time after the end of Cold War, or what we thought was the end of Cold War. And people were coming with stories that since then I think are very familiar to all of us, right? People discovering that their parents were not their real biological parents, that they had a different name, or that they were Jewish and never told anyone, but now for the first time were coming to this Jewish institution and whispering their stories and writing them down often for the first time. So I think that I almost had to become interested in the immediate post-war history in Poland, because it was unveiling in front of my eyes, although I think about it only now, looking back, and I connect the dots of, reading through the protocols of the Central Committee of Polish Jews. These were the things I was paginating. Hearing the stories that people were bringing and the emotions, the suppressed emotions that they were coming wrapped up with. Of course, there was also my own personal story of discovering a family history that propelled me, but it was this combination of sources that nobody looked at before and of a new topic. And I think that I asked Avi whether we could simply talk less about me and more about the field. So I will just say this up front, that I remember a conversation I had with Israel Gutman in his kitchen. I actually remember distinctively. It was late in the afternoon. The sun was already down. It was dark-ish in that kitchen, and I told him what I was intending to write my doctoral dissertation, which was the Zionist movement in Poland in those crazy, strange 5 years after everything was shut down. And Israel Gutman said to me, there was no Zionist movement in Poland. This topic makes absolutely no sense. Now, I was, a first-year doctoral student. It was a terrifying pronouncement to hear from someone who was not only a great scholar, but a witness to the topic that I intended to write about. And only again later, I thought that he was obviously speaking here as a witness for whom the Zionist movement that he joined, he was part of as a member of Hashomer HaTzair, and all he knew, what was left of it, as it were, after the Holocaust was so inadequate to that description that he simply rebelled, as if I was making a comparison or arguing for a clean continuity of institutional or ideological history, which I wasn't. But also the field of aftermath of the Holocaust, which is now a huge field in Holocaust studies, and we can talk, Avi, about it and with other guests, how much it belongs to Holocaust studies. Is it a subfield? How do we exactly package it? But it didn't really exist. People were just beginning to work on DP camps, something that you, Avi, wrote fantastic work on. But I was starting earlier, before these Polish Jews arrived into the DP camps. So yes, I think that in that sense, my work on the aftermath of the Holocaust was a way to approach the Holocaust without writing about the Holocaust, but also to mine these sources that really nobody was yet touching. And then it was interesting to see the pushback of Polish Jews who came of age before the Holocaust, or who were young adults after the war, because Israel Gutman was not the only person who told me that there is no topic in this topic. It's Celia Stepnicka of the On the Edge of Destruction also hated the topic. So there was something about this presumed continuity that was difficult for Polish Jewish survivors as a perspective, which I think is interesting in and of itself. Now, I was not planning to do the second PhD, which is something that you always need to explain at the table and prove that you are really a nice and normal person. But this is also a function of how Polish historiography looked like at the time. There was a growing interest. There was a lot of goodwill, but nothing compares even closely to the scholarly network and institutional network and expertise of many scholars in Poland now. So when I arrived at NYU as a Fulbright, I actually discovered on the fifth floor of Bob's library that there is an entire body of knowledge on Jewish history that I did not know exist, all the DS-135 books that needed to be read. And that's how the second round came to be.
So it's really interesting to hear you describe, first of all, sort of the growth of this field, which we can go back to what we can call aftermath studies, right? Sort of this question, which has been remarkable, I think, in the last 25 years. And you're exactly right to sort of point out that from the opening of these archives, the time in which you write your dissertation first, and then the book about the immediate aftermath of the war in Poland, the Zionist movement. I mean, it makes sense that you would have scholars who would say, oh, there's nothing to write here, but also who had not looked at the archival collections that had not been available to see that actually there was a history to be written here. And so that's one of the things that's been remarkable, is to see sort of the ways in which these collections, both on the period, after liberation, or sort of from 1944, 45, and then looking at the collections on the DP camps, how much there is to be written on the aftermath of the war. And maybe we'll come back to this when we talk about sort of the major trends in the field. But I'm curious too, so you talked about sort of looking at the aftermath of the war, but then your second project, so you said sort of not writing directly about the Holocaust, but looking at the sort of the edges. So your second project then looked at the interwar period and the writing of Jewish history. Your book, Conscious History, Polish Jewish Historians Before the Holocaust. So you said you sort of, this discovery of just this vast collection of the DS-135, like the materials that are in the library, that what exists there. But what was it about sort of this cohort of Jewish historians, some of whom, the collections that you found there in the Jewish Historical Institute, I'm sure sort of helped inform this study. What was it about this group of scholars that intrigued you, that you said, this is the project that I want to take on next, that this is the book that I have to write next?
Well, that's something that I think a lot of graduate students experience, or I should say the lucky ones experience when the topic comes to you rather than when it's handed over by your advisor, who might hand over a fantastic topic, but I still think that there is a magic about the topic finding you independently. And Avi and I sat in the same seminars that were taught by Professor David Engel. So for me, and I think you you found your topic in the seminar. I found my topic as well by reading David Meyer's book, Reinventing Jewish Past. And that was about someone from Eastern Europe coming to American writing of history. A lot changed. So Polish historiography, and again, I think a lot of friends and colleagues who are participating and maybe listening have experienced that encounter with Polish and German historiography of the slightly older date, when what you get are very detailed reports from archival findings, and the analytical aspect is a lot thinner than what is expected in American work with your historical sources. And also, as I was trained, I think because also Poland was coming into this exciting decade of independence and rebuilding and building institutions, etc. Political history has been really the queen of the field. And when I came to DS 135 and to the seminars taught at the Skirball department, I really, for the first time, discovered or tasted social history, intellectual history, and the combination of the two. I must also say that I never heard of gender. That totally dates me, but nobody was writing about gender or I should say, very little was written about gender in Polish historiography of early 90s. So there was a lot of excitement in encountering things that were done to material about other Jewish communities. David Meyer's book is about German Jewish intellectuals and their way of writing Jewish past. And I remember thinking to myself, I wonder what would happen if I was to apply this to Polish Jewish history writing. Now, again, this is not a Holocaust book, although the Holocaust is in the title, and I think that's a curse of many titles of many historical books that deal with before the Holocaust, that this is how the title kind of plays them in the on the timeline of the Jewish past. But I must say that writing it, and I wonder how other scholars experience it, when you write lives, and this is a collective life story of 2 generations of scholars, and you know what's going to happen to this whole project, right? To individual lives, but also to things they're planning, such as creating the central archives of the history of Polish Jewry, right? We know that there is the central archives of the history of the Jewish people in Jerusalem, but they were planning an archival institution like this in Warsaw and forcing Jewish communities to send all these pinkasim and all these precious documents that will get burned just a few years later, for the most part destroyed forever. And you know that this project will never have a chance to materialize. So the Holocaust was there, although it was more an intellectual challenge to not allow the shadow shape writing about this social and intellectual and cultural reality. But I'm very grateful for the experience, because I think that, you can avoid the Holocaust only that long if you're interested in history of the Holocaust. So then, there was no escape. Another option would be to write about 19th century.
So it's as you say, right? Like it's so interesting to think about the intellectual exercise, right? That sort of trying to avoid teleology, trying to avoid the knowledge of what's going to happen, but also writing about these historic subjects that you're writing about in this interwar period, imagining the possibilities for what could become for Polish Jewry, right? Engaging in this project of sort of building community and the political opportunities and the vibrant debates that are taking place. And yet at the same time, I mean, the project that you undertook to write about sort of the Polish Jewish historians is so important to provide a context then for the nature of Polish Jewish responses when the war breaks out, right? Like, I think one of the things that has been so lacking in many cases from the field of Holocaust studies is a sense for what is the nature of the community that then encounters the Nazi onslaught with the beginning of the war, right? So that work is so important, and you do it well, right? To say, like, this is the nature of the community that existed, you know, in the interwar period, and then to give us that grounding to better understand some of these key figures who do play such a key role during the war in terms of the different types of responses. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Avid. I mean, it's always wonderful to hear good things about one's book baby. And I do agree. So I want to share with you two anecdotes. One is from teaching several years ago to a group of students who were absolutely amazed that there could be Jews that were interested in Polish culture. They completely expected Jews to be into French language and literature, and you can obviously be into all kinds of others. You know, Pushkin is a great writer, etc. But what is there for Polish Jews to indulge in with Polish culture? And we had actually a great discussion about how at least a generation that, Avi, you got to know intimately in your work, people who came of age in the Second Polish Republic. They might have been born before 1918, but they were coming of age and through the schools. And you read that in multiple autobiographies and even in oral testimonies. People talk about this painful tension between all kinds of experiences of anti-Semitic rejection, for some coming later in life, for some coming early in childhood. To some extent, your class could protect you until a certain point more than if you were not of the upper middle class family. But that was often accompanied by infatuation with Polish Romantic literature and poetry, and sometimes not so great books like Sienkiewicz, who, and I'm probably one of the last generations who still got bitten by that literature in childhood. So it's, yeah, I agree, and I think that I was reading Javi Dreyfus, a dear colleague and fantastic scholar, dissertation before it became a book. And yes, she's showing exactly this, how long Polish Jews see a connection before they collectively, to a large degree, decide that they are being betrayed by their non-Jewish Polish neighbors. Let's use that term. So thank you. But yes, I hope that the book plugs exactly into how that generation, of course, each person is different, and there are differences between Galicia and former Congress Poland and Warsaw, and Vilna is different than Lviv and small town. But for all these differences, there is a certain formation of a generation of Polish Jews, and historians and telling history has a lot to do with it.
Yeah. So I before I ask my next question, I just want to remind the audience that if you have questions and you want to join the conversation, to please use the chat feature and give us a sense of what you would like to ask, and I'll turn to the audience soon to engage them in the conversation. But Natalia, I do want to ask you about sort of as we alluded to, there are some fascinating trends in the field that now sort of thinking about what has developed over the last 25 years or so in the field of Holocaust studies, and just looking at your CV, which I'll embarrass you slightly, is 30, what is it, 30, trying to narrow down sort of about 35 pages of work, and
Because I'm old.
So, but one of the things that's fascinating is you have been able to engage with many different areas of research in the field. You've been very, very active in editing different projects, and of course, editing issues of Pauline studies in Polish Jewry, both on writing Jewish history and making Holocaust memory, a couple of special issues, but then also, I'll just list a few, recent project on documenting and studying the Holocaust, another project on the rescue turn and the politics of Holocaust memory, another co-edited project on social networks during the Holocaust. I could go on. Your work on you alluded to gender and sort of how that affected the nature of survival during the war, violence against Jewish women, Jews in hiding, and the creation of surrogate families. I mean, really fascinating, sort of lots of different areas that you've managed to be involved in, which captures, I think, some of the most exciting trends in the field. So tell us a little bit about, from that vantage point of being able to work with so many different scholars. That's one of the exciting things about editing collections. You get to see some of those really exciting trends. What do you see as some of the most exciting trends in the field, the new areas of research? What's being done, what needs to be done, where things are going?
We have 5 minutes. So I wanted to say that, and Avi shares my feelings in this, that editing volumes is time consuming and at times frustrating, and you get to know people, your colleagues and your peers in their best and in moments of their stylistic weakness at times. But it's an amazing learning experience, and I've been doing it repeatedly because I also believe, as someone who came from one historiography to another, with on the way also dipping a toe in Israeli historical conversations. I remember I took a class with Yehuda Bauer that only later that I realized that this was when he was working on the death of the shtetl, and we were looking at the primary material that became part of the book narrative. But because of those transitions, I really believe in meeting on the page, and it's a lot less than it used to be when scholars from Eastern Europe and scholars from American Jewish studies history did not really meet a lot. There's a lot of fantastic scholars who learned all of those crazy Eastern European languages. There is a lot more dialogue, but I still think that these volumes offer a great chance, not just for editors selfishly, but also for participants and for readers to take different angles with the chapters included. I think that we could talk about all kinds of things that are happening in the field. I would just mention something very obvious. That is the absolute. I think that we can say that relying your research on Jewish sources became acceptable. It wasn't acceptable, certainly not in European historiography where that need for cross-reading, cross-checking with a proper Nazi document really held for a long time as your must-do exercise. I think that it brought a lot of new angles to the study of Jewish experience, a lot of gray zones, a lot of topics that were there, but not as visible unless you looked for them. Just to mention mixed families. There's now a big project that is being run out of University of Vienna, and then it will come to Institute für Zeitgeschichte in Munich by Michaela Ragam, and that interest in experiences of mixed families, I think, will reveal interesting angles. There's a lot of microhistories being written. Tomasz Friedel, who is here, does amazing mezzo level research. So it's the research, the field is very diverse, and old good Alltagsgeschichte, everyday life, still, I think, offers new finds when applied to new material. But I think that that presence of variety of Jewish sources really changed the field.
Yeah, and I think, in many respects, as you've indicated, this is also a product of our training, right? This idea that we can bring to bear the value of an understanding of Jewish history and a sense of, to use Friedlander's term, of writing an integrated history, but also sort of understanding the significance of studying Jewish responses, and that was so much missing from the field of Holocaust studies, to incorporate Jewish sources, but also because there was a lack of training that had taken place. A lot of scholars from the field of Jewish history had avoided studying the history of the Holocaust for various reasons, which we can discuss. But because there was a lack of training of scholars who were versed in Jewish languages as well, that affected the way in which the field is developed, which is also that there's so much more that needs to be done in terms of, I'm thinking about, you mentioned Bauer's death of the shtetl, right? Which was, in a sense, just kind of an initial sort of setting a path for possible future research to do comparative work on sort of the different types of responses in different Jewish communities in different regions of Poland, which, it's a brilliant study, but he just sort of set the possibility for future research in those directions. And it's almost like waiting for somebody to pick it up, that needs to be continued.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I also have to mention something that I have mixed feelings. I always tell my students not to talk about what they feel, but what they think. But that the field seems to, and this is not this last year's phenomena. Again, I wonder what you, Avi and Boaz and others, think, that there is a shift to memory studies. And I had a great pleasure to be responsible for the Holocaust division of the Association for Jewish Studies for a few years. And it was really visible how the number of applications, interesting projects, but really probing, meta, and something that, yes, maybe we could think of as part of this aftermath studies, but I think it's quite separate from looking at the experiences of survivors, of various entanglements of survivors, social, economic, emotional, religious, what have you, rather than, looking at monuments and museums and songs and videos and social media, etc. Now, I don't want to sound disparaging, and I've read interesting work, but I wonder whether the field is shifting. One of the shifts that the field is taking in that direction.
Yeah, it is interesting. And again, if people want to ask questions, feel free to type into the chat or let us know that you have a question that you'd like to ask for Natalia. But I think your point about sort of having a vantage point, for example, being a Holocaust Studies Division Chair in the Association for Jewish Studies, seeing it is an interesting vantage point to see like what are the trends and what are people working on from different disciplines. And there is a lot of research that one sees in, let's call it representations. You know, so, and this is all important research, right? You know, sort of, like you say, memory of the Shoah, or literature, or representations in film, or memorialization, monuments, right? All of these things are interesting and important. But to go back to the Bauer example, we're still not seeing as many scholars doing this sort of archival research on the history of what happened during the war, and specifically the nature of Jewish responses during the war. And that's an interesting question, right? Like, what are the factors that are, and maybe it's that, you know, we have to train the next generation of students, or that they need the access to the languages to be able to do that research, or to be able to have the time to sit in the archives to do that research. And you know, on the other hand, aftermath studies, which we mentioned before, there's been a real explosion, I think, in terms of research on, let's say, the first decade. So the history of the first decade of the aftermath of the war. You know, you have a new book that you've just co-edited on sort of the writing of history in the aftermath of the war.
Eva Kovac was here, and I'm waving.
Hi, Eva. Yeah. For example, right? Or we were recently did a workshop together with some excellent scholars doing work on memorialization, documentation, historical collection projects, mapping. We talked about sort of the DP camp. So there are areas that have really captured fascination, and that are growth areas, and yet there's still so much more work to be done.
Right, and I will add one more thing to the pot, and this is connected to a volume that I just sent the proofs yesterday to Cambridge. And Avi, you have a wonderful chapter in that volume, the third volume of Cambridge History of the Holocaust, that I had the pleasure to edit together with Marian Kaplan. And we were trying to find a balance in the table of content that basically was the table of content of a variety of Jewish experiences, and then including other victims. There is a chapter in it about Slavs. There is a chapter about Roma Sinti. There is a chapter about homosexuals, but it's still, you know, you mentioned integrated history of the Holocaust. So if we were to take this integration as a project to a different place, that is not to write history of the Holocaust as history of Jewish Holocaust and then add these other groups of victims, but try to make it into a story of persecution and victimization. Yeah, I think that this is something that maybe that's a result of the fact that I see myself primarily as a historian of Jews, right? And as a historian of Jews, I'm interested in the Holocaust, but I'm not a genocide studies person. But I can just share that, you know, since still from this very recent submission that we were trying to find a way in structuring this volume, and maybe it could have been done differently. It is somewhat conservative in a way that it conceptualizes the voices of the victims, because the volume is about the voices and experiences of the victims.
Yeah, it is interesting. And yet, in constructing a project like that, where you are also making choices and decisions in terms of how the history is being shaped, what types of questions you're asking, what perspectives you're including. So I see that we've started to get some questions that have come in, one from Tomasz and one from Boaz. So I will take Tomasz Friedel first, who asks, Natalia, if you had to name 3 historians who had the most impact in shaping your own thinking as a historian, who would they be?
Oh, this is such an impossible question. Given people who are here, given people who will possibly listen.
Let me just say, Natalia, you can either answer this because Tomasz does not specify. It could be 3 living historians. It could also be your scholars that you look at from interwar Poland, right? There's many different ways that you could answer this. Yeah.
True, but let me mention
your survivor historians that you write about. Yeah,
right. All of them. But I do want to mention Ezra Mendelsohn, who obviously was not a Holocaust historian, but I have come to Hebrew University as a Lady Davis Fellow before my American exposure, and the way that he engaged with a pretty clueless graduate student who came out of Poland as this young star, but really knew very little, hasn't read what she should have, but didn't even know what she didn't know. Engaging in discussions and sort of reading together things. We had meetings at the Yadut Zmanenu and the Institute for Contemporary Jewry, where I would get some reading list and I would come to discuss them. I think this was one of the most formative experiences for me, in the complete openness of questions that one could ask of the material, and thinking out of the box, and also breaking those Byzantine academic lines of seniority, which for me was very, very new.
Great. Good. Now we're starting to get more questions coming in. Boaz, I'm going to save your question on the future for the end, right? It's sort of because historians hate talking about the future, but we'll talk about I'll save that one as for our last question, the future of Holocaust studies. But another question that Leonid submitted, Natalia, what do you think? How important is you mentioned microhistory, local studies, for the history of the Holocaust, which has also been one of these trends, right? So
I love local history. And Lonia, you know I do. There is a question of, and even as if I can say so, my historians, my interwar Polish Jewish historians were asking that question as well. When you write all these communal histories, then from those bricks we'll build the beautiful palace of Polish Jewish historiography. So how many of the bricks do you need to actually construct the edifice, right? How do you choose the bricks that are necessary? But I think that for me, that micro perspective reveals the kinds of interactions, human interactions, affect, and entanglements, continuities from before the war, all kinds of relationships on a professional and personal level that otherwise are invisible or are just thrown in as an embellishment to the bigger narrative. And I will not mention the books that do it. But I'm thinking about a new book of another dear colleague and friend, Hanna Kubatova, who probably is closer to meso than micro historical perspective, but there is a lot of that from bottom up understanding of Jewish, non-Jewish interactions. So yeah, I like it very much. I'm actually writing the book I should be writing the moment we finish this Zoom is to finish the book on hiding in Eastern Galicia, which is not exactly a local history, but it ends up being a micro-historical story because it follows the experience of hiding through the experiences of several families and individuals. So it's life stories of people that hopefully you will remember their names. It's not the Jews of Eastern Galicia.
Yeah, and I think you know, it's I'm glad you bring that up because, you know, sort of these micro histories or the intimate, I think you have one of your articles is on intimate violence, the relationships that develop between individuals. I mean, you know, for a long time, this was not considered to be sort of significant enough, right, for the field and, you know, major projects, and it was dismissed. But I think, you know, what a lot of scholars, you included, have shown is that the only way for us to understand sort of the nature of Jewish, non-Jewish relationships or the responses that Jews had to persecution is sometimes to look at it on this micro level and then to build out from that, right? And so doing these studies of, you know, survival and hiding or relationships that develop in the woods or, you know, different examples, that is the way to write these micro histories and then help us have a better understanding for the nature of the Jewish experience during the war.
Amen. Amen to this. And I will just say, again, it's a little bit of an autobiographical vignette and we're running out of time, but apropos understanding attitudes, like you mentioned the attitudes of Polish Jews, but I'll just share with you that when I first came to Yad Vashem, I was 17 and I was brought there by my mother's classmate. And I didn't speak Hebrew. I spoke very basic English and some in Russian. And this is before the big wave of Russian Aliyah, so it didn't help you. And my guide asked the woman who was there if there was some kind of a leaflet in Polish that I could take. And she started yelling that Poles were worse than the Germans, and you know, the kind of terrible, painful narrative, which was completely shocking for me. You know, at 17, just coming to Israel for the first time, I really did not know that just the mention of the language would lead to such an emotional response. But I understand it a lot better 40 years later.
Yeah, so interesting. So Boaz, I'm going to combine the two questions, which I think in some ways are related. So Boaz writes here, do you think that the inclusive view of the Holocaust and feeling, in quotes, conservative about focusing on the Jews, right? So this almost sort of apologizing for, like, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but sort of feeling that it's a more conservative approach to writing the history of the Holocaust by just focusing on the Jewish perspective. Boaz writes, you know, with some concern, are we looking at a de-Judaizing process in Holocaust studies? And Boaz had another question earlier, what do you think is the future of Holocaust studies post-October 7th? So, you know, I think that there is like clearly what we're getting at is that there's a real tension in the field, right, between sort of, let's say, writing the Jewish history of the Holocaust, right, which is a lot of what we've been talking about, incorporating the study of the Holocaust within the broader scope of Jewish history, and then sort of writing the history of the Holocaust in a comparative genocide studies approach, right? And it does feel that there are sort of two directions pulling in opposite directions that the field is going. So
Yeah.
what do you think about those trends?
It's definitely happening. I think that it might be a very different future in Israel and elsewhere. I can say that, again, I would be interested in other people's experiences, but my sense is that I likely have better chances to teach about the Jewish Holocaust when I teach a Third Reich victimization and genocides to students who do not come to listen to or to participate in Jewish history class. But they're interested in World War II, they're interested in the Third Reich, and they will get the Jewish part of it, but they will also have it located in that comparative perspective. Now, I'm not sure I see myself as writing that kind of history, because again, I am interested in relations between neighbors, Jewish and non-Jewish neighbors, and there is enough of mess and gray zones and diversities in East Central Europe. But I think in teaching, this might be the most effective and possibly unavoidable trajectory, and possibly leading to good things. But again, I am thinking about it. I will be back in a classroom teaching the Holocaust class in the spring semester 26, hopefully.
Yeah, it is interesting to think about sort of what students' expectations are, what classes they sign up for. And then, I mean, the truth is, and this connects to a question that Leonid just added in about how important is the study into perpetrators for today's Holocaust research. What's interesting, and you can address that too, but very often students might sign up for a history of the Holocaust class thinking that it's mainly going to be a class that focuses on perpetrators and how did the Nazis organize the final solution, and that will be the focus, and then perhaps surprising them with teaching about the Jewish victim perspective, which ironically or not, they probably have almost never learned about, even if they think they have a good sense. So, and you know, I guess this does raise a question about, you know, to Leonid's question about how much more research do we need on perpetrator studies versus sort of what seems to be missing is sort of adding to the, not just the Jewish victim perspective, but also what we often called kind of the neighbors, or the sort of what was once called the bystander perspective, sort of that the local networks and responses of the surrounding population.
I mean, first of all, Lonia, you're one of the scholars who contribute to this scholarship. I think it's very important, and I, you know, again, I came in a way way rounded, because I started looking at the files, thinking that I really don't care what the perpetrators thought, you know, where they were raised, what their family background, how they became the guards in the ghetto, or the gendarmes, or the executioners. But when you look at on a micro level, you meet them. And they have faces and names and personalities, you know, maybe not in largest ghettos, right? But if you look at the smaller ghettos, people remember in testimonies that that gendarme was actually not terrible as much as the other gendarme, et cetera, et cetera. So it brings them, for me, it's the victims, it's the Jewish sources that brought back the centrality of perpetrators to the picture. So I'm not dismissing that at all.
So interesting. All right, I see. Maybe we'll make this the last question, just with an awareness of the time. I see that Tomasz has asked, do you think it is currently possible to produce a monograph of the Holocaust in Polish lands, or are there still significant gaps that need to be filled first?
That's such a great question. Well, depends who is writing, but I do think, so first of all, I'm sure you know that Yad Vashem has been working on this collective volume monograph. So it will be interesting to see when it comes out. I don't know how advanced it is at this point. It was quite advanced last time I heard the presentation, but then all kinds of things happened in the world. I think we have so much more than we had even 5 years ago, not to mention 10 years ago. So I think it's time for the first monograph, and then we can revisit it, or our students will revisit it, hopefully.
Yeah.
And rewrite
No,
it and crash it and write a new one.
Right. Somebody has to. Yeah, it is remarkable that there, and hopefully this will come out soon, this sort of history of the Holocaust in Poland, that essentially does not exist yet as a book, right? And we have a collaborative project under the auspices of Yad Vashem, which will combine sort of some of the leading scholars in the field working together, right? Because it's such a huge project to try to craft such a book. But yeah, it's amazing to think that it actually doesn't really exist yet. So, which is also quite remarkable. Well, I'm going to turn it back over to our host, Boaz Cohen. But let me just say thank you so much to Natalia. It's always a pleasure to engage with you in conversation, to see you on Zoom, and even more so in person when we have the opportunity to do so. But thank you for taking the time to share your experiences with all of us. Boaz, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I was sitting here and enjoying myself and thinking of all the things I have to write about and could be still written about and could be integrated so much. I will say that since I'm the host, so I can say whatever I want, I think it's really important the fact that we have a and Natalia, you yourself are encompassing, manifesting this, of having so many different aspects that we talk about or research and trying to build some sort of kaleidoscope of the story. I think I will relate to the question I asked. I think we have we certainly need to teach the Jewish history of the Holocaust. You can't do it without relating to other people. This is not happening in a vacuum. And also to understand several things. I always tell my students when we talk about the aftermath, in which I'm also involved, and we talk about the Jews trying to bring back their children to their nation, bring every child should go back to his nation, and we think these Jews are so parochial and so singular. They can't accept that the child had a good home. Some children had a good home in a Polish home. The rescuers were Poles. Were not, you don't rescue the child from the Poles. The rescuers were Poles. And even people who did this work have been deliberating, did they do the right thing? But if you look at the larger picture at Europe of these years, the Poles themselves are working really hard in Germany to find their own children and bring them back to the fold, to the nation. We have the child search teams working in Germany for the Poles, for the Slovaks, for the Czechs. People are looking for their children because every child that will stay in Germany, if he's a Polish child, then that's a victory for Hitler. So we think of something like a Jewish story, but it's actually a pan-European story, at least for the nations who were conquered by the Nazis. So it is important. When I teach child rehabilitation after war and Holocaust, I do speak about this. I think it's important to speak about this, to see the larger picture. Still, I think we have an obligation, and it's a mission to tell the Jewish story of the Holocaust, especially as it is being downplayed so much now, if I may say so. And it's our to do good historical research, but that gives this perspective that other people will not take care of than the people in this field, wherever they come from, whatever their background is. In the end, it's the people doing the work that we know on our shelves that have the ability and therefore the obligation and the mission to do this. And I think what we had today is an amazing discussion with someone who is doing it. So thank you so much, Natalia. And thank you so much, Avi, for doing this discussion. And I will say two things. First of all, we are still registering students and faculty for the Holocaust Innovation Entrepreneurship course for Holocaust Memory, which we are starting the 5th year now on the 27th of this month. And we still have places. We are looking at specifically now at students, undergraduates, graduates, young faculty, emerging faculty, more than emerging faculty. We are really working on this. And we are all, anyone just write to me if you didn't see one of our myriad announcements about this. And I greatly recommend you recommend it on. I will, if you didn't see it, then be in touch with me and I'll make sure you see it. So thank you so much and good night from Israel.
Good night.
Night.